Ed, thank you so much for joining us again on the SALTovation podcast. It's good to have you back 4 years later from your original visit.
Thanks for having me back. Clearly, I didn't ruin the podcast, so I'm happy
No, you
to
just made
talk
it better.
policy if I can.
Right? You provided that longevity that we needed. So you are no longer with the Denver Business Journal like you were when you first joined us. You are now with the Colorado Chamber. And so can you describe to our listeners your new role?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. I made the transition to the Colorado Chamber in February 2023, and I wear two hats there. One is I'm the VP of Strategic Initiatives, in which I help the Chamber figure out ways to move forward on issues that help businesses. A big focus of mine has been workforce development. I'm trying to work to figure out how to better train our students for the jobs that are needed out there. But the other hat I wear, which probably is more relevant to today's conversation, is I write a news site called The Sum and Substance that focuses solely on statewide business policy and how it affects people's ability to operate in Colorado. And while I work for an interest group, I try to write everything down the middle because my goal is to get people talking about business issues. And I figured this is the best way to do it.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for your work doing that. And I guess, how did you come up with that title, or was it given to you? What's the preface of the Sum and Substance title?
Just the idea is that the sum and substance refers to when you have a whole of something, both the higher level details and the nitty gritty details, and that's what the site is. It is not for the faint of heart. It is for people who really want to jump into business policy, and I will go into depth about various bills, various rulemakings, anything that generally the state government, sometimes the city government or federal government is doing that is going to affect business. So if you are looking for in-depth business policy news, we have the sum and substance of all that on the Sum and Substance. That's where the name came from.
Love that.
How was that a pivot from the Denver Business Journal? Was it different work, or is it pretty similar?
It's similar in some ways, different in others. It's the
Okay.
depth that's different. At the Denver Business Journal, I covered 6 different beats, state government being just one of the things that I covered. And so I didn't
Oh,
have as much time as I wanted often to really dive into state government, which was my favorite beat of all that. It's the one I think that affects people the most.
yeah.
And so launching the Sum and Substance allows me. The other thing is, people are going to go to the Denver Business Journal looking for stories on a variety of subjects, but they may not necessarily want 1,500 words on sales tax policy. So I was often told, keep your stories a little bit shorter there. I have no such limitations on this one, and I do go into great depth on everything I try to write at these. And so it's a much narrower focus that allows me to go into more detail about the things I'm writing.
Interesting. I didn't realize that disparity. That you would be more immersed, and you obviously prefer it. So that's fantastic. Because I always knew you for like what you wrote about tax policy. I didn't really. I mean, maybe you wrote other things too, but that's where I focused on you in
I
my
did,
reads at the Denver Business Journal.
and while we interacted a lot on policy and on state government, I was also covering restaurants and tourism.
Okay.
I was covering the beer industry. I was covering economic development and transportation. So I covered a little bit of everything.
Okay.
And so this is just a much, as I said, narrower focus that allows me to kind of become even more of a subject expert on these things. What are the specific things that
Right.
the state is doing that affect business?
Interesting. Why did the chamber think that was? They didn't have someone like you before.
They didn't. It was one of those situations where I wasn't necessarily looking for another job. I think I had just decided that my time in journalism after 28 years had ended, and I wanted a new challenge. And I just talked to some of my sources that I knew very well. I said, "Well, what's out there for a guy like me? What
Yeah.
can we do?" And that, when talking with Lauren Furman, the CEO of the chamber, kind of evolved into, I think we could use you.
Yeah.
And it was actually, I had the idea, like, if I come over, I think what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have me write a newsletter to your members, kind of breaking
Right.
down what's happening at the Capitol, because nobody
Yes.
else, I
No.
knew that my leaving the DBJ was going to mean that the focus was going to move away from the things I did at the DBJ. They tend to focus on real estate and other things. I was an outlier in our 45 paper chain in how much I covered the capital for a business journal
Okay.
publication. And it was Lauren's idea, who said, no, 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 let's not have you do a newsletter. Let's do a public facing website. Let's get it out there so it's not just our members, but anyone who is interested in policy can hear this. And that's something I've been very grateful for,
Me
is I track
too.
everyone who subscribes to the newsletter, and you see a lot of staffers at the Capitol with various lobbying firms, and even a lot of elected representatives who are now subscribers. And that's the target audience is, hey, we
Yes.
want you to think about business. And I'm not going to try to cram our viewpoint down your throat. Everything I do, I'm going to try to, even when the chamber is very active in a bill, I try to get the other side of it.
Mhm.
But I want you to think about this rather than just the hot button issues that get so much time and so much space at the Capitol.
Yes, agreed. And there's a lack of understanding, which is what started this podcast to begin with, is we have these conversations. What is Nexus? What is this? Why does it do this? Why does that state do that? And people really don't get it. Even though this state taxes have been around for 100-something years, and sales tax is around for almost 100 years, and income tax has been around since the 40s. So people still don't understand it. And we're very multifaceted in how we go to market, especially with technology now. You're not really situs to your own jurisdiction. And so I think there's a huge disconnect between how business operates and their duties across each state jurisdiction in which they do business. So that's what was the impetus of this podcast, to be honest, was to educate the population somehow.
And it's extremely helpful in that sense too, because I think when people think about taxes, they simply think, okay, what am I going to pay the IRS
Yep.
in April? And they don't realize kind of the breakdown of state
Uh-huh.
taxes, the fees that the state puts on, how
Yep.
how much it reaches into their life in about 17 different directions, not just one big
Mhm.
tax picture. So it's
Yep.
good to what you do, what I try to do, try to educate people about specific things. So instead of saying I just like taxes, they can say, well, I like these, but I have trouble with these, and specifically how my business has to report them. So that's a much better conversation that can lead, frankly, to better outcomes if we're talking about very specific policies.
Well, I think a lot of people think, I don't have an income tax, therefore, and you're like, government has to raise money some way, somehow. So they're going to get you on property taxes, sales taxes, fees, something. So don't think Oregon with no sales tax is actually more tax advantageous than another state. In fact, Colorado is a fairly low overall tax state. It's just that we're very complicated as our home rules. We actually, Connie and I, one of my cohorts on our team, she and I helped keep United Airlines pilot training center in Colorado by showing them the value of the taxes here versus the other states that we're looking at, and how people were looking at one piece of the pie and not the whole pie, that we were a better place to stay. Plus, the facility was already there. It was absolutely tax advantageous to keep that here. It was very secretive when we got to do it, but they're still here. And that was partly driven by our information, because nobody has that out there. That, assimilated look of how does Chicago compare to Denver? We were able
Right,
to do
and
that.
they're gonna be advantages and disadvantages in a
Correct.
lot of different ways.
Yep.
But I'm glad there are people like you explaining that to
Yeah.
corporations.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, and when this, episode is released, the Colorado legislative session will have ended. And so what were some of the
Baby.
biggest issues that, were kind of tackled or tried to be tackled during the 2025 session? Were they resolved? How were they resolved? Is there anything kind of significant in your purview that wasn't resolved that we may see again next year? Do you have any,
Oh yes.
comments on 2025?
Yeah. Yes. No, and it's funny that you asked that because as we're taping this, we're about 36 hours out from the final gavel of the session that happened on Wednesday.
Oh, it's only
And
36? I didn't realize they were
yes,
that
yeah,
tight.
yeah.
Okay.
Wednesday at midnight, or about 7:30, actually, I should
But
say.
they could
They ended.
extend. They have.
They're not likely to go back at this point.
Okay.
And yeah, I had literally just written something about the session that talks about how many issues are unresolved. I think for a lot of businesses, the top issue this session was the attempt by labor unions to overhaul the state's Labor Peace Act. That is the 82-year-old law under which companies, workforces can unionize in this state. And Colorado's law is very unique. Most states there are two types of states. There are right to work states where you vote, and if 50% plus one of your company votes to unionize, you become a union, but nobody is ever forced to join the union or pay dues or negotiating fees. And then there are 23 other states that say we have a union, a pro-union policy where you go through that same first election, majority votes to join a union, boom, you're automatically having negotiating fees deducted from your paycheck. Colorado's format is unique because you go through that first election, and again, if a simple majority says we're going to unionize, you unionize. But then you have to go through a second election in which 75% of the people voting in that election must agree that you can take negotiating fees out of your paycheck. It's typically about 2% of your paycheck each time to grant what is called union security, which is giving unions the money to negotiate on the behalf of the workforce. Unions came in this year and said that is an obstacle. We're done with it. We're tired of this. It's stopping unionization. And Colorado does have the lowest unionization of any state in its private sector that's not a right to work state, and pushed through a bill that said we're going to get rid of the second election. The problem is that businesses said, no, we've tried to negotiate other compromises, but we want to keep the second election in place. We feel it's important for workers to say how they want their money used. And Governor Polis also said, look, I want to see compromise in this. I want to see you all work out a deal. And that deal broke down with about 4 days left in the session. There was just everybody kind of gave up and walked away and said, we don't have a deal. And I think what you're going to see is that bill is going to be vetoed by Governor Polis. He's essentially said he's going to veto it. And that's going to lead to a couple of things. First of all, you will probably see the issue come back in 2027 when we have a new governor, because Polis is limited from seeking a third term after the end of 2026. And the second thing you're probably going to see is that the unions now will run a ballot initiative in 2026 that would make Colorado what is called a just cause state. It would be only the second just cause state in the country, where employers have to list a very specific reason that you can be fired. And there are a limited number of reasons someone can be fired. People don't realize it now. Everyone says, oh, I have to be fired for cause. No, you actually don't. Your employer can fire you for any reason they want in this state. And in every state in America, except for Montana, that's actually true. This way, I mean, employers, I should add, employers can't discriminate. They can't fire you because you're black. That is clear breaking the law. But they can fire you because, you know what, you're not working out. They don't need to go into great detail about why it's a just cause to fire you. This ballot initiative would say, no, employers would have to list a very specific reason among these possible reasons that you are fired. And if not, you can sue them. And that's going to do possibly even more to kind of throw off the state's business climate than expanding the Labor Peace Act would have done.
Interesting.
So that is, you asked what were the top issues, and I kind of went down that rabbit hole because that was the issue we heard about the most. But there are a number of other top issues that I think we looked at this session. I think there were some significant fights in the healthcare arena. The idea being put forward, for example, that there was a plan to cap what hospitals charge to certain insurance plans that did not end up passing. But that was among the many big deals that we're talking about in healthcare. There were a bill that passed on the last day of the session that would significantly expand how the state goes after wage theft. And it would go after ways that worry business. For example, it would assume that if someone filed a wage theft complaint against an employer and that they were later fired, that it was retaliation. It's assumed it's retaliation, especially if it's within 90 days. That is something that worries employers that's coming out of the session. There are good things that came out of this session. There are a couple efforts at regulatory reform that got passed. We at the Chamber commissioned a study that came out in December, showed Colorado was the sixth most regulated state in America. Has about 200,000 regulations, 45% of which are redundant or excessive as compared to other states. And we were able to put through a bill, we being my bosses, not me, were able to put through a bill that's going to require more auditing of two of the state divisions that are most involved in regulation to make sure that they are regulating properly, and that could lead to bigger conversations down the road. And then there's all kinds of, I don't want to call them smaller fights, but fights that affected specific industries. Things like there was a big to do about whether restaurants could roll back the minimum wage paid to tipped employees in cities that have raised the minimum wage above the state's level. We can get into it if you want, but uh, essentially restaurants lost that fight. And as we see restaurants closing and continuing to struggle, they point to labor costs and say, look, this is just another nail in our coffin. So there was a whole lot of policy. It was a big year for big ideas to be considered at the legislature, and I think there's no shortage of things that will be continuing to be fought over into 2026 and beyond, even if they didn't pass this year.
But then we're in a budget deficit, so how are we gonna pay for all that oversight? That's the other
And
question.
And that's one of the reasons you saw some of these bills going down, is because there simply wasn't a way to pay for some of these things that people wanted to get done. And it's
Hmm.
a great question how we're going to pay for things. I think you see more and more legislators turning to the idea of enterprises, where we're going to charge you a fee, and that's going to pay for things.
Interesting.
One of the big fights near the end of the session was over an attempt by the Health Insurance Affordability Enterprise, which now has a fee of between 1.15% and 2% on every privately sold insurance policy in the state, that goes to fund a couple of programs, including a reinsurance program that keeps down prices in really high priced areas, and the Omni Salute program, which offers no cost insurance to undocumented immigrants. And the IAE board, still got a mouthful there, came back and said, look, we're running short of money. Maybe in past years, we would have gone to the state and say, let's put some general fund money to these programs. But they couldn't. So they said, we'd like to raise the fee. And the legislature did not let them go forward with that. In fact, I think you see more and more legislators from both parties saying, maybe these fees are not the right idea, because we're hearing more and more complaints from our constituents about them. So that's one way that we're going to keep talking about how to fund things, is more fees, more enterprises, and that'll be the talk until we start to see some give in the budget.
I think we're expanding the base by going after software too.
Yes, absolutely. That was
Reinterpreting our definition of what's taxable, tangible personal property, i.e., downloaded software, and mainframe computer services. So we got that.
Yes. I mean, and that was absolutely one of the bigger fights for businesses this year. A bill called House Bill 1296 that sought to roll back tax breaks in a number of ways. And the first one that you alluded to was one of the
Mhm.
biggest controversial measures of that would basically say software sales that are now considered to be exempt from use and sales tax would not be anymore. There was some great dispute over how much this would cost. The fiscal note said, we think this will bring in about $17 million more by doing this. But Governor Polis himself had said earlier, I think I can bring in $100 million from this. And there was some belief that it could bring in as much as $300 million. So
I believe it.
no matter what number you throw at it, that's a major tax change that was put forward.
Correct.
It was taken out of the bill. There was not support this year to make that major tax change. But the authors of the bill said, I'm going to bring it back, and we're going to do a very specific bill next year that says we are going to roll back these software tax breaks. So we're going to keep fighting about that. There also was a clause in that bill that was much more focused, that would have required, we have what's called a regional home office tax credit, where insurance companies, if they have 2.5% of their overall workforce located in the state of Colorado, get a 50% discount on their premium tax this state. It's a very big deal for them. And there was a portion of HB 1296 that would have raised from 2.5%, the percentage of workforce they need to have in the state, to 7%. And they kind of lost their mind about that. So a lot of business groups said, this is is really unfair for you to be almost tripling this amount when just over the past 3 years they had pushed the amount up from 2% to 2.5% to begin with. That was taken out of HB 1296. The bill as a whole, frankly, was gutted. And the authors have said that not only are they going to come back next year looking to up that percentage, they said we're going to look to get rid of the regional home office tax credit period. We don't think it's working anymore. So prepare for that fight coming up as well.
And the delivery fee, someone tried to get rid of that. That fell on deaf ears, and it keeps going up every year by a penny.
Yes, yes. The retail delivery fees, one of I think about 6 different fees that were authorized through a 2021 bill that raised about $5.3 billion for transportation. A lot of it from the people who use transportation. And yes, they are one of the more unpopular ones for business in particular. It's interesting.
Mhm.
I don't hear a ton of complaints from consumers that they're paying
Mm-mm.
27 cents on
It's
every
29.
29, thank you. 29 cents on every delivery they're getting from Amazon. But businesses in particular say it's ridiculous that you have to add this kind of fee and break it out on the
Right.
on the receipt, and it's just not working. And there were several attempts. I think there were 2 different bills that would have repealed that fee. They both died in their first committees this year. Now there is an effort to put that repeal on the ballot in 2026. And so the retail delivery fee is something that the fights over it are not going to go away. And it's funny that we harken back to that 2021 bill because that was the bill that kicked off the enterprise fights in many ways, because you had
Oh.
new fees on gas, which were absolutely no different from our gas tax, except that to raise the gas tax, you would have required a vote of the people. And we haven't seen our populace in a very tax friendly voting stance in, well, ever. And to put fees on gas purchases, you don't need a vote of the people. You only need a vote of the legislature. So we created a new fee for that. There's a fee for diesel. There's a fee for Amazon deliveries. There's a fee if you step into an Uber or a Lyft. There are all kinds of fees out there that were created by that bill. And I think that, and I don't think the authors of that bill thought that they were going to ignite a giant conversation on the use of fees. But I think even more so than the money that bill has raised for transportation, that is the legacy of Senate Bill 21260 is it's the fee bill, and people are going to still keep fighting about those fees and any other proposed fee that comes up because of it.
Well, as a tax person who's like in cahoots with the Department of Revenue all the time, when I learned about that bill, it was April and it was effective July, and it was enacted a year prior because Department of Revenue is tasked with implementing it. They didn't want anybody to know. And I just about fell off my chair thinking, I can't do this. I can't tell my small business, media business, you need to figure out how to collect 27 cents on every sale. I mean, that is not easy. Amazon can do it because they can have someone program it, but small business cannot do that. So it's like an impossible thing. And then you've got all the gig economy, like you say, the Ubers, and they're not really doing it clearly. Amazon is clear, but I don't think a lot of other companies are clear as to how that applies to them. So I don't think it's a very easily enforceable or implementable product, which is a problem because it's not making business life easier to have to add another line item to an invoice that's not part of their institutional process. Like, oh, if in Colorado, add so many cents to your bill. I'm selling in New Mexico. I'm selling to Oregon. I don't care about that. How do I build that technology to work for when I deliver something somewhere via common carrier or motorized vehicle? Like everybody's going to be on bicycles. Anyway, I was just disgusted by that. And I know it's rated as a ton of money, but I think it's really onerous on business.
Yeah, and I think the state heard a little bit of that, or the state heard all of that, and they took a little bit of stance back in 2023 when they said that businesses can now eat the fee.
Yep.
Before, you
Yep.
literally had to charge people for it. You couldn't say, "Don't worry about it, I'll
Yep.
pay your 27 cents." And they said now businesses can eat the fee, but you still got to indicate that you ate that fee for them.
Yep.
So
I was part
it's
of that advocacy trying to get that.
yes.
some
I
clarity on
believe I
that
remember
because.
talking with you about that.
But that
Yes.
was heartbreaking to me with all the business clients we work with, thousands of companies. They're like, how are we going to tell them? Like, they could care a less about Colorado. We're like 5, 6, 7 million people. They care about California, Texas, New York, 30 million humans. Like,
Well,
some of this
except for
stuff
the
is so
fact
immaterial.
that now, Colorado did it, then Minnesota did it, and
Oh,
now I
yeah.
think there were 5 or
There's
6 states
10
that
states that are looking at it.
right, so we kind of paved the way for the viability, kinda did the dirty work in that regard to, "Hey, is anyone gonna sue over it? Is it gonna hold up?" And, kind of, Ed, like you said, the people don't care, right? Because 'Cause I'm gonna spend more than 28 cents getting in my car to, go to the grocery store or whatever. Like, I'm fine with just paying the 28 cents because I'm paying for convenience, right? If the voting constituents kinda in state don't care, what's to prohibit, every other state doing the exact same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that every other state has going for it that we don't is they don't need to do it. They could literally just institute a tax, but with the taxpayer bill of rights here, Colorado has to
And that's
find
fair.
these clever ways to get around it so that, not only is it not a tax that you have to have people vote on, but it isn't considered in the same taxable pot of income as the rest of your
Right.
general fund because you're creating Tabor exempt enterprises and fees that'll put the money into it. And I know there was recently a court decision, and I forget which organization took on Senate Bill 21-260 and said like this is illegal, this circumvents Tabor, and the court ruled no, actually it doesn't. This
Yeah.
this by the letter is what Tabor said to do in creating enterprises. It's just that in 1992, I think there were about 3 or 4 enterprises in the state, and now the number of enterprises multiplies every year. And
Well, despite the fact that other states don't have Tabor, why are they all looking to impose a delivery fee? I find that very interesting. They could expand the base, but they resist that too. So they put a little fee on things. I mean, it's just
it's easier.
legislators don't understand what goes on for poor business, though, and they are the taxing engine, right? That it's too much for the business is of society to take that burden on to fund government, right? They're not making funding government easier. So it's very
No, no.
interesting to me.
Yes,
Speaking of
yes.
which, right, our sales and use tax system with our home rule cities and our state, with the SUT system and just making it easier for taxpayers to comply in our state is such a challenge.
And it is, and I'm not sure they've unlocked the key to making it easier for local cities to comply or for taxpayers to comply now. I mean, when you're still having to go to a database and look up exactly where the address is that you're
Yep,
sending something to, and in terms of the overlap of special districts and city and county lines
yep.
and whatnot, it is difficult. I've heard the word Byzantine a lot to describe our local tax system, and I think the SUT system is, which I know you all have talked a ton about, is something that is going to continue to be a focus. How do we improve it going forward? But it is interesting that for the first time since what 2019, I believe, we won't have an interim committee meeting this summer to discuss these kinds of issues. That because of the state budget shortfall,
Mhm.
the state budget or the legislature cut 10 local committee or cut 10 interim committees from meeting this summer, and the SUTS committee is one of them. And that may be the last we ever see of the SUTS committee since they are due to expire after the 2026 session.
Yep. It's very disheartening because we have made a lot of traction in 10 years. Slow, but we've done something that people said could never happen, right? 70 remote districts filing separately. How are you going to get anybody to do that? Not. But the SUT system allowed some, it's got to be filling coffers, I would think. But I don't know. I don't have all those numbers.
I agree with you. You think, and those are the reports that you hear is that interstate companies that had been reluctant to file taxes,
Hmm.
an Etsy or someone like that, that was just like, why would I file taxes for what sales were made in Colorado? Now do it because the SUT system makes it easier to do so, and
Correct.
because the law requires. But there's still a lot of ways it could be simplified. I know that
Hmm.
the local governments sure think that as well, but we'll see. I imagine that will be a discussion for the 2026 session. Do we want to
Well, even
continue that
you
committee or
live in
not?
Wheat Ridge, and we talked earlier that you live in Wheat Ridge, which is a bedroom community to Denver. So you're just across a street from me, actually. And, Denver's a very large metropolitan area. Wheat Ridge is not. But if you could get all that consumption at the front door and get that 3-4% tax, that's a nice thing, so that if you make it simpler, they're going to fill those coffers if you don't have enough businesses located in your jurisdiction paying use tax on their inputs or charging sales tax at their local store level. So you're getting that front door delivery, which is how our economy is going towards. It's much less go to the store, bring it home. It's more pick it up, have it delivered to my front door. So where's the tax going to go? I mean, I don't think Amazon is still collecting in the home rules of Colorado unless they have a warehouse there. So we're still
I
losing all that money. And
yes,
my
yeah,
suspicion is, but I don't know Amazon for sure. But my understanding last I heard was they weren't going to collect the local taxes, even with the SUT system. But they may have changed their mind. But I don't
y-
think so.
yes, yeah. But a lot to continue talking about with the sub system.
Yeah.